Indian-Myanmar border, the free movement to end, and I am joined by Professor Ashpri Pant, Vice President Studies and Foreign Policy, ORF. Thank you very much, sir, for joining me today on the show On Point. Though FMR reports came out yesterday, today other salient features came out. The first thing which I would really like to know from you is, how does it affect our Act East policy? You know, if you recall, Vajpayee ji spoke about movement of people and goods. It was an attempt which he made in Kashmir. It didn't work out because of the Pakistan stand. Now, similarly, on the eastern border, with the FMR being dismantled, it affects that, and we have a Kaladan project also there. So what's the big picture which is emerging? What's the first thing which struck your mind when you read the reports?
Well, you know, I think in some ways it was bound to happen given the instability that India has been facing along the border. But certainly, when you look at when you think of India's Act East policy, which has been about connecting, whether it is various modes of connectivity, with especially people-to-people connectivity, and enhancing that across our eastern frontier, all the way to East and Southeast Asia. This has been an important element of that Act East policy. Now, I think in some ways our ASEAN partners will understand the challenge that India faces, because they also are facing a challenge with what is happening in Myanmar. Myanmar is a terrible tragedy that is unfolding, and this is as much of a problem for India as it is for ASEAN members. So I think in that sense that there will be some understanding of it. But I think the worst affected would be, of course, the people-to-people engagements that India and Myanmar had tried to build because of these ethnic and familial linkages that spread across the border. And that would be a challenge as to the disappointment and sometimes frustration and anger that people would feel at the collapse of FMR. But I think from India's vantage point, the kind of challenges that India has been facing, India had to balance its requirements for people-to-people ties with actually what is happening along the border and what is happening in Manipur in particular.
You know, if you look at the issues at hand, Manipur is a classic example where nationality is feeling and thinking that it has turned into an ethnicity, and ethnicity is asserting itself as a nationality. You know, the change in demography and the change in assertion in context of power led to this massive violence. And if you look at the action taken by states, it not only preserves the primacy of community, but is also sending a message that this demographic change which is occurring because of the fluid border cannot be allowed. And the voices are in unison from both state and the center, sir.
No, absolutely. And I think that is why this becomes, in some ways very important for India to make this stand very clear that, look, what is happening in Myanmar is very unfortunate. And what is also happening is that state in Myanmar is losing control. And with state, we mean at this point the military junta. The military junta is losing control over these border areas where militias have taken over. And those militias are actually not able to control those borders the way perhaps at its peak military junta was able to do, and therefore work with India in sustaining the FMR regime. Now that there is no partner on the other side, it doesn't make any sense for India to continue with this policy, and therefore I think India is reassessing its options. And as you said, is giving a very clear signal that, look, at the end of the day, state has to resort to certain actions which are about enhancing the primacy of the state at a time when on one side of the border, state is becoming peripheral to the wider engagements, and therefore as non-state actors emerge as the primary conduit of negotiations of managing the border, it is very difficult for India to engage with them at this particular point. So therefore I think this makes sense from India from various perspectives.
Brijesh, tell me one thing, in context of the sort of position which the Chief Minister of Mizoram has taken, it's quite contrary to the position of the Chief Minister of Manipur. And then the position of the Chief Minister of Nagaland is ambivalent on this matter. So the discord which is there in terms of a policy which requires a national consensus is pretty evident in this area.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, what is unfortunate is that local compulsion or the ethnic compulsion is something which is forcing you to guide your interest. So what may be good for your political interest may not be good for the national interest. And there should be unison as far as that national interest is involved. We saw last time, when the previous Chief Minister also refused to get biometrics done of people who are there in the refugee camps, and they said like there's no way we are going to go ahead with it, despite pressure from the center home minister that that we should know where exactly who has all come in and all. So I think one of the underlying fact or the underlying point is that given the divergence of opinion of these three states also is not in sync with what the national interest require. This is something which has been the Manipur Chief Minister has been saying it for a very long time, right at the start of conflict, ever since we have been covering this.
But it's also surprising that you have a strong strategic national security step that is being taken, which is FMR, border, smart fence. But there is lack of political process simultaneously.
Absolutely.
The Chief Minister of Mizoram has not been engaged on the issue of biometrics. There is ambivalence there. Riot Act has not been read to him. Boss, there's rules which are in place passed by the Parliament of India. We need to know who is a foreigner and who is a citizen of India staying in Mizoram. Similarly, I would say even the political process has not kick-started. So you have a strong position, acts, policy being implemented, but on these issues, I wouldn't use the word leniency, but I would use that long rope is there.
It's like, show me the person, I'll tell you the kind of person. The adage goes that, you show me the guy, I'll tell you how I want to deal with it. It's the fact of the matter is that if there is one policy, it has to be dealt with, unequivocally by all the states. But it depends, most of the time, the center also gets very lenient. There are political considerations.
This is when BJP has Hemanta Biswa Sarma in charge of NIDA, it's not as if, they're not actively coordinating. Most of the ministers go. I'll come to you on this because
they are coordinating.
This FMR also has a political context. But then, Professor, does it change our engagement with Myanmar? And what is happening in Myanmar, how is it affecting our northeast security? Because you have multiple players in play there, sir.
Yeah. I mean, see, Myanmar what is happening in Myanmar is certainly very, very, problematic from various perspectives. And particularly, I think what India has been trying to do in Myanmar is to use the centrality of military junta to ensure that its borders are secure. Now, as military junta is unraveling, as you have these pro-democracy militias gaining ground vis-a-vis the military junta, it has put India in a very difficult position, because on the one hand, certainly India has been making a case that gradually military junta needs to move towards more of a democratic settlement of the problem. But you also require a strong government, a strong military in Myanmar that can handle the border issues as far as India's national interests are concerned. So I think there is now a contradiction emerging in that policy, which India will have to handle very delicately. And as we are speaking, we are looking at these pro-democracy militias gaining ground, and therefore challenging the might of the Myanmarese military. Perhaps that will shake up the Myanmarese military in ways that we have not seen over the last few years, but it will also entail certain costs that will be imposed on India's policy vis-a-vis the region, and it will also what India will need to do is to ensure that its interests are protected in a very, very difficult environment at this particular point. So therefore, a strong national security strategy that focuses on internal security at the moment and border areas is the need of the hour, and I think some of that we are seeing being implemented.
But you see, isn't it ironical that the world, through various, reporting agencies, Professor, know more about North Korea, which is called Hermit Kingdom, and less about Myanmar, which is so big, has a long border, is the only Southeast Asian state to have a Himalayan range. The northern part, it snows there, and it goes way down to the most commercial part of the seas. And people have no idea what sort of politics is there, how many ethnicities are there, the people there, who is in power. Very few people go to Mandalay. I was very fortunate enough to not only cross over from Moreh to the Tamu, which is the other side of the border in Myanmar, but I think I was the only journalist covering Prime Minister Modi when he went to Naypyidaw. And the only thing I realized was that you had Indians, you had Tamil expat population, but you knew very little about the entire country, and you have very few books on it. And this is the sleepiest, easiest to manage border, which is turning hot, sir.
Absolutely. I think very few people know about it, and very few people understand the complexities of Myanmar. And I would also add that, as a result of that, we have seen a very black and white approach that is often taken by the Western countries in particular, where there is a lot of pressure being put on India that, look, you should do this, you should speak up for democracy, you should speak up for human rights, etc., without realizing the complexities that are inherent in the very management of a very complex society. And for India, multiple interests converge. Border issues, insurgency. You have had internal security issues combined with that, and then this is played out in real time in the last few months as the Manipur situation got out of hand. So I think that the lack of understanding is also a reflection in some ways of the challenges that a country like India faces. And in our own case, we have seen how few people, before Mr. Shah spoke as the Home Minister in Parliament about this, how there was hardly a handful of people who knew that this is also a problem. The Manipur problem is also being impacted by Myanmar. I think the entire focus was on internal dimension of the problem, without realizing that a large part of this problem is externally driven. So I think certainly the lack of knowledge, the lack of awareness about Myanmar has also led to some of these policy challenges that India as a country is facing day in and day out, both internally as it is manifesting itself in Myanmar, as well as externally with its partners in the West.